It began with a voyage across a sleeping ocean, in the summer of 1587, beneath a sky veiled in fog and salt. A single English ship approached the shores of a strange and quiet land. Its sails hung like ghostly wings in the still air. On board were 115 settlers, fathers and mothers, craftsmen and farmers, women heavy with child, and children wide-eyed with dreams. They had left behind the stone and smoke of England, chasing whispers of a new world across an ocean that seemed to go on forever. They called it Roanoke. The island rose from the water like something half-forgotten, wrapped in pine and shadow, its coastline curving like a sleeping animal. Too many on the ship, it felt like a promise. To a few, it felt like a warning. John White, appointed governor of the new colony, was the first to set foot on land. Even the air inside the clearing felt wrong, as if the wind held its breath, as if the trees were listening. An artist by trade and a quiet man by nature, he stepped onto the sand with hope in his chest and a weight he couldn't name in his bones. Some said they were tribal warnings, others said they were not made by human hands at all. The colony was meant to be a beginning, but some beginnings are born from endings we do not understand. Hunters returned from the woods with stories they didn't want to tell. His early entries were practical: rainfall, soil quality, crop notes. But in the margins, his tone began to shift. The fort they found was in ruins. Built by earlier settlers and abandoned, its palisade had collapsed, and the buildings inside were scattered, gnawed by time and vine. Stranger still were the mark-struck symbols on trees, white and winding, spirals and lines no one could decipher. Elizabeth Dare gave birth to a daughter, Virginia, the first English child born in the New World. He knew he would have to leave, return to England to request aid. The supplies were thinning. The native tribes were distant, wary, in the island. The island was changing. Her birth was a blessing, a symbol of hope in a wild and watching land. Still, the settlers began to rebuild, and the trees were no longer still. Hunted and carved new homes from the bones of the old, but something beneath the soil stirred. At night, the forest creaked with sounds that didn't belong. Whispers curled between the trees. Shadows moved in ways shadows shouldn't. John White kept a journal. August 19th. A figure at the tree line. Tall. Watching. No animal moves when it's near. I do not sleep. He tried not to show his concern, but the others felt it too. One morning, White stood at the edge of the water, staring out toward the horizon. Before he left, he gave a single instruction. If you are forced to move, carve the name of your new destination. If you are in danger, carve it with a cross. He said goodbye to his daughter, kissed Virginia one last time, stepped into the boat, unaware that the wind had shifted. Behind him, Roanoke disappeared into the mist. Somewhere deep beneath its roots, something opened one eye. The sea called again. It was early September of 1587. The leaves on Roanoke Island were just beginning to change deep gold, soft red, and shades of brown that melted into the earth. Yet within the warm colors of autumn, a chill had begun to settle, like a warning whispered through the trees. John White stood on the edge of the shore, watching the waves roll in. His daughter Elizabeth had begged him not to go. "Just wait until the frost passes," she had pleaded, holding baby Virginia in her arms. "Wait until spring." The small boat that had carried them to Roanoke now waited to take him back. The colony needed more supply seeds, tools, medicine, and most of all, help. The colony was barely surviving, and the journey across the Atlantic was slow and perilous. If he didn't leave now, they might not survive the winter. The decision weighed heavy on him. He had delayed as long as he dared. Children who once laughed freely now whispered to each other in secret, drawing strange symbols in the dirt ones they claimed came from their dreams. But John knew better. Once a group of hunters followed the sound into the woods. They never returned. Only a single warning spoken by an old man with shaking hands. So he gave instructions. From the distance, Roanoke appeared calm and still. But as it faded behind the veil of mist, John felt a coldness in his bones he could not shake. It was filled with lullabies for her daughter, notes on planting seasons, and strange dreams she could not explain. One passage read, if something went wrong, if they were forced to leave the island, they were to carve the name of their new destination somewhere visible. If they were in danger, they must carve a cross beside it. When asked where this friend lived, she pointed to the earth and whispered, underneath. I ran to him, but he did not move. When I touched his hand, it was cold as stone. Then he opened his mouth, and a crow flew out. Tightly pressed a kiss to Virginia's tiny forehead, and promised he would return. The boat pushed off from the island, creaking as the oars dipped into the water. One morning, Elizabeth awoke to find the well completely dry, its bottom lined with claw marks. He didn't know then that he would not see Roanoke again for 3 long years. Back on the island, time moved differently. Crops failed to grow no matter how hard she worked. Even the water from the nearby stream began to taste bitter like old iron. Without White's presence, something seemed to shift. The forest felt closer. The light didn't fall the same way. Shadows stretched longer than they should. A woman named Agnes, who tended to the sick, claimed the soil had turned sour. Some nights the settlers heard singing, not human singing, but deep and echoing, like a distant choir humming beneath the ground. The Croatoan people came one final time. They left fish at the edge of the settlement, laid carefully on woven leaves. No words were exchanged, no eyes met. You stayed too long. The island does not forget. After that, no more visitors came. Elizabeth Dare kept a journal during those days. Last night I saw Father standing at the edge of the forest. Virginia, now a toddler, had begun talking to someone only she could see. She called it the Pale One. Time stretched thin. The sky hung lower. The nights grew longer. And in the absence of their leader, the colony became quiet to quiet. She didn't scream. No one did anymore. They just watched the trees and waited for something. The first frost came early. Thin ice formed along the edges of the river before the end of October. The sun, once warm and forgiving, now rose dull and gray, casting a cold silver light over Roanoke Island. Dried fish became brittle and sparse. The children grew pale and quiet, their laughter replaced by dry coughs and tired sighs. A silence had fallen thicker than before, the kind that seemed to press against the ears, muting even the rustle of leaves. The settlers began to ration their remaining food. Cornmeal turned musty. He had gone out at dawn to set traps for rabbits, just beyond the clearing. He never returned. They found his footprints leading in, but none leading out. Only a single snare, still swinging, and beside it his hat soaked with dew and something darker. Once the guard claimed to see a full line of figures walking silently through the trees, their heads bowed, feet never touching the ground. And still the forest watched. She sang lullabies over the crackle of the fire, though her voice trembled. She began to speak to her daughter in hushed tones, asking what the Pale One had said that day. A dog named Jasper, loyal to young Samuel Blake, ran into the woods one evening and came back, changed. They no longer ventured far from the fort, not after what happened to Thomas. I saw something in the reflection of the water basin that was not mine. After that, Elizabeth Dare gathered the children each night to keep them close. Then silence. No one was outside when they opened it. The roots turned black. The grain smelled of rot. Virginia says he doesn't like the cold, the child replied once, twirling her curls. He says the cold is someone else's time. Elizabeth did not ask what that meant. She simply held Virginia closer. A woman stood beside it, her skin like bleached bark, her mouth sewn shut with thread made of hair. In her hand, she held a bone flute. The settlers began keeping watches through the night. But even those on guard reported strange visions, flashes of movement beyond the walls, glowing shapes in the distance. He quit the watch the next day and refused to speak again. And always the sound of wind where no wind blew. Inside the palisade, the air felt heavier. Fires sputtered, even with dry wood. Animals once domesticated chickens. Goats began behaving strangely, fleeing to the forest and never returning. Its eyes had turned milky white. It did not bark anymore. It only stared. And when it disappeared 2 nights later, no one followed. She simply looked out the window, toward the dark tree line. Agnes, the healer, kept careful notes of the settlers' conditions. Her final pages grew frantic. Night chills take hold even near the flames. Skin turns gray, breath shortens. Some whisper in their sleep names I do not know. And last night, one evening, a strange knocking came from the stockade gates low, methodical, as if with a hand not made of flesh. 3 knocks. The next morning, the crops they had carefully stored in crates had withered overnight. No one spoke of leaving. They didn't need to, it was too late. Then the dreams began. Shared dreams. Men and women who had never spoken of their nightmares suddenly described the same thing, an old well deep in the forest, circled by stones etched with symbols. She plays when someone is chosen, one man whispered. By midwinter, 6 people had vanished. No cries, no signs of struggle, only their shoes left behind. Elizabeth began sewing words into Virginia's blankets. Words of protection, Croatoan symbols, fragments of prayers. And one night, in the glow of the dying fire, her daughter whispered, "He says, Papa won't come back. The island won't let him." Elizabeth didn't cry. There was no moon that night. Only the sound of the sea breathing slowly against the shore. By the turning of the season, the world should have woken. March came with its promise of renewal, yet nothing bloomed. No birds returned. No buds peeked from the cold ground. The trees remained bare, like bones reaching toward a colorless sky. And though the snow had melted, the chill never left the air. Days blended into nights, and weeks passed unnoticed. The rhythm of planting and harvesting, the old, trusted patterns of survival had broken. The people of Roanoke stopped marking time, sat for hours staring at corners of the room as if someone stood just beyond the edge of sight. Others wandered the village aimlessly at dawn, barefoot in the frost, murmuring in languages no one taught them. So had the people. Some no longer spoke. Agnes, the healer, disappeared in late March. Her journal remained open on her table, stained with wax and something darker. The final entry was only 3 words. No one heard her leave. Her belongings were untouched. It remembers us. Elizabeth Dare began dreaming of the sea. Voices echoed from the depths, whispers and rhythms, calling her name over and over again. They gathered in the center of the village, lit candles and read from damp pages of scripture. But the flame flickered strangely, bending away from the altar as if pushed by an unseen breath. Another dreamed of long hallways underground, carved from bone, where lanterns flickered and vanished as he passed. Only the moon remained, and even it had changed. No longer white, but tinged faintly red, like an ember too long smothered. The dogs barked at nothing, then stopped barking altogether. Fires grew harder to light. Even voices sounded thinner, like speaking through cloth. When Elizabeth asked what he meant, he simply smiled and pointed at the floorboards. She heard nothing, only silence, but her skin prickled cold. She awoke each time with wet hair and salt on her lips, but not as it was. In her dreams, the ocean pulsed like a living thing, waves beating like a heart. Others had dreams too. One man claimed he saw Virginia standing on the roof of the fort, eyes glowing, speaking in a voice that was not hers. When asked where she learned it, she replied, "He sang it in the dark, so we wouldn't be afraid." The children began to draw again. This time, their pictures were no longer of trees or stars, but doorways, circular, surrounded by spirals and marks no adult could translate. The child seemed peaceful, come even happy as, if she didn't feel the cold or notice the quiet terror around her. He held something in his hands. Virginia's blanket was torn and stained, with a word sewn crookedly into the fabric. She spoke often to the Pale One, though she no longer called him that. Some children claimed the doorways opened at night behind trees or beneath the well. One morning, little Samuel Blake asked, "Why don't grown-ups listen when the ground talks?" The settlers tried to pray. One woman screamed mid-prayer and fled into the forest. No one chased her. No one dared. That night, the stars disappeared. Not all at once, but slowly fading from the sky as if drawn behind a veil. The ground began to hum at night. Low and steady, a vibration felt through the feet, deep and ancient. Elizabeth kept to herself, recording her thoughts on scraps of parchment. "There is something beneath this island," she wrote. "Not soil, not rock. Something deeper, something watching." She rarely let Virginia out of her sight. Now she simply said, "The teacher." And she began humming a melody no one had taught her. A slow, descending tune, soft as a lullaby, but haunting. One night Elizabeth dreamed of John White. He stood at the edge of the shore, his eyes hollow. Croatoan. She awoke before dawn. There was no wind, no birdsong, only the silence. And from the forest, far beyond the clearing, a single long flute note, like breath drawn through bone. It began with a name whispered in the dark, Thomasine, a woman of quiet strength, often seen mending tools or whispering scripture to children. She was the first. One morning her bed was neatly made, her shoes tucked beneath the frame. A warm bowl of ash porridge sat on the table, untouched. The hearth was still glowing, but she was gone. No footprints, no struggle, no sound in the night. Only a symbol drawn carefully in chalk upon her door, a spiral inside a circle, the same as the ones the children had begun to draw in the dirt. They found the same mark days later on the cabin of the Blackwood family, father and 2 sons, all missing without a trace. Their belongings were still there. A fire still burned. The baby's blanket was still folded in the cradle. Then came the sound. The air would thicken for a moment. Light would dim. Each time someone vanished, those who remained heard it just once, a deep tone, as if a great horn had been blown beneath the earth. And then silence would return. Elizabeth Dare tried to keep the remaining settlers together, held hands during prayers, shared what little food was left. But her eyes had grown distant, haunted. But this time her eyes glowed faintly with a color that wasn't light, a soft blue that pulsed, like something remembering itself. She no longer wrote in her journal. Instead, she carved small protective symbols into the wooden posts of the fort lines, knots, circles, ones she could not explain. She spoke softly. One night, she awoke to find Virginia standing at the doorway, gazing into the woods. The girl was humming again, that same strange melody. When Elizabeth asked what she saw, Virginia replied, "The teacher is making room, symbols within symbols, as if layered meanings hid beneath each curve." Some glowed faintly at dusk. His axe shattered on impact. His eyes bled in his sleep. The next morning, he too was gone. That same night, 5 more settlers were gone. The sun rose, yes, but it brought no warmth, and its light felt wrong, so it had passed through something unseen before reaching them. No one spoke of escape. She spoke only in whispers, even indoors. She began writing again, not in English, but in symbols that no one recognized. Her hands moved as if remembering something ancient, something buried. There was nowhere to go. The forest surrounded them like a closing hand. The shoreline was cloaked in mist. The stars had not returned. Then came the trees. Overnight, strange markings began to appear carved into trunks and ancient glyphs, unfamiliar to any known language. One man tried to cut one down. The forest was no longer just nearby, it had grown into the village. Vines creeping across doorways, roots pushing through floors, moss covering tools before they could rust. The children no longer laughed. They stared at the shadows as if seeing something that others could not. It was as if the island itself was reclaiming what it once owned. Elizabeth became quieter. She dreamed of stone doors opening in the earth. She dreamed of white figures gathering beneath twisted trees. He remembers his name. She dreamed of John White standing in a circle of fire, reaching toward her, his mouth sewn shut. By now, only a handful of settlers remained. They gathered once more around the central fire, surrounded by trees that leaned too close, by cabins that now felt like tombs. And still, Virginia smiled. She held her mother's hand and whispered, "He's almost ready," Elizabeth asked. "Who is he?" The child looked up, eyes too old, voice too calm. "The one who was here before the first word. The one who waited in silence while men built walls. He is the island, and now." That night the horn sounded again, deeper, closer, and this time, fire in the center of the village blew out without wind. There were only 13 left. 13 souls wandering among the ruins of what had once been a hopeful settlement. The cabins stood hollow now, doorways creaked in the wind, and the wooden fence meant to keep danger out had collapsed inward as though something had come from within. The names of the missing were no longer spoken aloud. Even the insects had vanished. It was as if the moment a name left the lips, the island remembered it tanned, came for them next. The sky no longer changed. The sun hung dim and still, a pale coin veiled in gauze. The air was heavy with silence. Only the hum remained, that low, ever-present vibration in the bones of the earth, pulsing in time with something vast, unseen and ancient. Her hair, once golden, had darkened like smoke, and her eyes shimmered faintly with that soft, unnatural blue. She looked up toward the canopy of lifeless trees and whispered something no one understood. On the 7th morning after the last fire had gone out, Virginia woke first. She stood in the center of the village, barefoot on the cold earth. Then she turned to the remaining settlers and said, "He's ready." Some wept. Some fell to their knees. One man walked silently into the woods and did not return. No one called after him. Elizabeth Dare held her daughter's hand and asked, "What does he want from us?" Virginia tilted her head, a memory so old it burned. Not want, not take. He remembers. He remembers all of it. Before the words. Before the ships. Before they carved names into the trees. This was his mouth, and we built our homes on his tongue. No one questioned her anymore. A key to a language lost before the world had a name. Not after the dreams, they had all begun to share visions of an eye beneath the island, staring not with sight but with memory. One settler, Martha Clark, had carved the word Croatoan into her door before vanishing. She left no other trace. But the word began appearing elsewhere in trees, in the ashes of fire pits, and carved into the bones of fish caught too near the shore. Not water, or something slower, thicker, a mist that pulsed, glowing faintly with that same pale blue the children had drawn into the dirt. Croatoan, Croatoan, Croatoan. Some in silence. Some singing softly, voices low and wordless, as though remembering a song their blood once knew. A word without a master. That night, the earth trembled. It's not with violence, but with purpose, like a breath held for centuries finally released. And from the well in the village center, once dry and forgotten, a faint light began to rise. Not fire. Virginia stepped toward it. Elizabeth moved to stop her, but her daughter only turned and smiled. He's calling the last of us now. We are the last story he needs. The settlers followed. One by one, they stepped toward the well. Elizabeth stood at the edge, holding her daughter's hand. She looked down and saw stars. Not the sky above, but stars below, swirling in spirals of memory, as if the earth had split open into a galaxy forgotten. Virginia turned to her. Papa won't come in time, but he'll find the word, and when he says it out loud, he'll remember to. By morning, the village was empty. No footprints, no bodies, no smoke, only silence. And on the tallest tree, scorched into the bark as if by fire that left no heat, a single word remained. Croatoan. It was a hot day in August, 1590, when John White finally returned. 3 years had passed since he left Roanoke Island. 3 long years of war in Europe, of storms at sea, of delays beyond his control. And through it all, he carried with him a single hope that his daughter, his granddaughters he had left behind, were still waiting. As the ship approached the coastline, White stood at the rail, heart beating fast. He strained his eyes toward the tree line, looking for movement, for smoke, for the faintest sign of life. But all he saw was mist. The sun dipped behind the trees like an old coin sinking into ink. The beach felt too quiet. The waves made no sound. And the wind, what little there was, carried the scent of old wood and something older still. The sailors rowed him ashore at dusk. John walked alone to the place where the fort had once stood. The palisade had collapsed inward, its timbers warped as if melted by time. Even the stones from the fire pits were scattered and blackened, their centers hollow and cold, and found nothing. No people, no smoke, no laughter, no cries. The buildings were gone, reclaimed by vines and moss. He called out, "Elizabeth, Virginia." The trees answered only with silence. Then he saw it, as if left behind not in haste, but with intention. On the post of the outer wall, one of the few still standing, a word carved deeply, burned into the wood. Croatoan, no cross beside it, no signs of distress, just the word, clean, precise. It was the signal he had asked for, the name of a nearby island where they might go if forced to leave. He clung to that hope like driftwood in a storm. But as he wandered the ruins, something gnawed at his thoughts. There were no graves, no belongings, not even scraps of fabric or broken tools. It was as if the colony had not simply vanished, but had never been there at all. And when he placed his hand on one of the carvings, he felt warmth of pulse, faint but steady, as if the wood remembered a heartbeat long stilled. He found symbols on the trees, circles within spirals, patterns he did not know. That night, he stayed at the edge of the village. The stars above were dimmer than he remembered, and in the distance, from deep within the woods, he heard a sound unlike any he'd known. Not a scream, not a voice, but a tone low and ancient, vibrating the earth, as if the island itself were singing a memory. He did not sleep. Instead, he stared into the forest and whispered his granddaughter's name. In the morning, before leaving the island, John White found something buried beneath a stone behind the old well. A bundle of cloth, his daughter's stitching, worn with time and weather, but intact. He unfolded it with trembling hands. Something that had whispered their names into the stone, the root, the tide. And there, along the edge of the blanket, sewn in delicate red thread, was the same word again, Croatoan. He pressed it to his face. He did not cry. He did not speak, because somehow, deep within the quietest part of his heart, he knew they were not lost. They were remembered by something older than time, by something that had watched the forest grow and the ocean rise. They had not vanished. They had been taken in. John White never returned to Roanoke, and no one ever found the settlers. Only the word remained, Croatoan, name carved into the silence of history, a name that still hums in the trees when the wind is right. If you listen closely, very closely, you might still hear it, breath beneath the earth, a name too old to forget, a story that never truly ends.